For most of British history, what happened inside a marriage was not just tolerated, it was protected from interference. Violence in the home was real, common, and often visible. So why did the law look away? The parish constable hears it, raised voices, a crash, a cry that stops too suddenly. He pauses outside the door, then walks on. Not because he doesn't care, but because he knows the rule. This is not his business. For centuries, the home was treated as a sealed space. What happens inside was private, domestic, and legally insulated. And that idea shaped everything. Under English common law, marriage was not a partnership. It was a hierarchy. The husband was legally responsible for the household, which meant he was also legally in charge of it. This authority came with expectation, provision, discipline, order. And discipline, disturbingly, included force. There was even a phrase for it, the rule of thumb, the supposed limit on acceptable violence. Whether or not the phrase was ever formal law, the belief behind it was widespread. Moderate correction was permitted. Intervention was not. So long as the household functioned, the law was satisfied. A married woman did not exist as a separate legal person. Under coverture, her identity was folded into her husband's. She could not own property independently. She could not sign contracts. She could not easily bring legal action. And if she was harmed, that harm was seen as internal to the household, a private failure, not a public crime. The parish constable might step in if a neighbour was assaulted in the street, but behind closed doors, the law grew quiet. Not because the harm was smaller, but because the victim was. This wasn't hidden violence. Communities knew it. Neighbours heard. Families intervened informally. Clergy counselled endurance. Magistrates urged reconciliation. The goal was not justice. It was stability. A broken marriage was seen as a social problem. A violent marriage was a personal one. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Privacy protected power. It shielded authority from scrutiny. But what happens when privacy becomes a weapon? There were limits. Extreme brutality could, in theory, attract legal attention. But extreme was defined narrowly. Murder, permanent injury, public scandal. These were thresholds. Fear, coercion, routine assault were not. Women who fled violent homes were often punished themselves, accused of desertion, immorality, or becoming a burden on the parish. Which raises a question worth pausing on. When survival requires escape, should the law punish leaving? I'd genuinely like to know what you think. Share your thoughts in the comments. For a long time, the law answered that question clearly and harshly. Religious teaching reinforced this structure. Marriage vows emphasized obedience. Suffering was framed as virtuous. Endurance was praised. Violence was reinterpreted as temper, control as concern, and silence as strength. The parish constable doesn't intervene, not only because the law tells him not to, but because culture tells him this is how order is maintained. And order, in historical Britain, mattered more than safety. By the 19th century, something begins to shift. Reformers, writers, and early feminists challenge the idea that cruelty is private. Campaigns against wife beating appear in newspapers. Courts begin reluctantly to issue separation orders in extreme cases. The idea that violence is a public wrong begins to surface, but the resistance is fierce. To intervene in the home is seen as dangerous, radical, and un-British. Privacy, once protective, now looks suspicious. Legal change comes late and cautiously. Protections expand in fragments. Police powers increase. Divorce law evolves. Assault becomes assault, regardless of relationship. But even into the 20th century, enforcement remains inconsistent. Domestic violence is minimised, downgraded, discouraged from prosecution. The parish constable becomes a police officer. The door still stays closed, just a little less firmly. The modern shift is not just legal, it's moral. We now understand that intimacy does not excuse harm, that privacy cannot trump safety, that love is not authority. Domestic violence becomes a crime, not because violence increased, but because tolerance ended. And that's the moral U-turn. For centuries, domestic violence was considered private because the home was a site of power, not protection. Understanding that history doesn't excuse it, but it explains why change took so long. The door stayed closed because society told itself that order mattered more than safety. Today we know better, and knowing better obliges us to act better. Thanks for walking a little further down the road that made Britain with me. If you liked it, there's a button especially for that down there. And if you liked it and subscribe, there's a whole back catalogue for you to enjoy, including this one that YouTube's chosen especially for you. I think you'll like it. So until next time, take care, and I'll see you soon.